Hello and welcome back. Sean here, Mountains Garage on a rainy Saturday afternoon. October can be beautiful, sunny with multiple colors of foliage, or it can be dark and rainy and kind of cold. That sums up today. Excellent day to be out in the shop. I just stuck most of my 9-inch Ford project together. To recap, it's 58 inches wheel flange to wheel flange, centered pinion, 3.89 gear set, positive traction, 31 spline axles, 11-inch disc brakes. To assemble it, I finally received my lube locker gasket. I wanted to try, typically when I put a third member in a 9-inch Ford housing, it's going to stay for a while, and the stock paper gasket was never any good, so you RTV it in there. And depending on what brand of RTV you use, it really locks it in there. The lube locker gasket seems promising. No sealer required. Could not be any easier to assemble. And in this case, everything fit. It's a concern if you've ever narrowed a housing by yourself. You have to take a few things into account, like if you're going to run a gasket, how thick it is. The lube locker actually squished down more than I thought. It has, like, I guess worms or nylon on it or whatever seals it, but it's not as high as I thought it would be because I bolted the center section in. Well, first off, I used my crane to lower it in there. I could have easily lifted it in there. Well, I don't know about easily, but it's kind of gummy. There's really no way to hang on to it without pinching your fingers. But I had it in this position on the bench, and I have an engine crane right there. So, a crane, if you will. So I stuck a pry bar through the yoke. I had bought the strap sets the other day for the 1350 yoke. Stuck a pry bar through it, a pair of vice grips on one side so it wouldn't fall out, and just jacked it into place. It lowered right down in with very little drama, and that's when I remembered that I wanted to spray the inside with, in this case, CRC 3-36. It's a rust preventative. It'll dry and last a year or so, probably, if not more. The whole inside of the housing is as bare steel as the outside, and I don't want it rusting sitting around. So I pulled it back out with the crane, sprayed around in there, put it back together, bolted it up. On a 9-inch Ford, there's 3 of the nuts that are kind of difficult to get a wrench on. These are full height nuts. If you had thinner nuts, it would be easier, but it's not insurmountable. You know you have a 9-inch Ford if the bottom 2 you can't get on with a socket because the housing is over them. It curves out over it. That's when you know you got a 9-inch Ford and not an 8-inch Ford. 8-inch Ford, you could gun them all, I think. So I bolted that in, slid in my first axle. You set the backing plate on the T-nuts that go through the housing end. The axle goes right through the hole in the backing plate. And when it's correct, the depth of the axle sticks out the thickness of the backing plate, so it's smooth. So the retaining plate can just go on next. Then you put the 4 nuts on the outside, and that holds the whole thing together. I put the first axle in, and it did not go in all the way. I cut it kind of generous using the dog bone, the ICT billet dog bone. But every differential is a little bit different. Before I even tried sticking the axle in, I could have measured, but it would go in all but 1/4 of an inch. So I had to cut that much more of the short axle, this one. No big deal. The other side fell right together. So I went ahead and finished that side. The next day, pulled it back out. Still had to use a slide hammer to get the axle back out. Cut off 1/4 inch that I, in fact, it should do it, and this side went right together. Piece of cake. Today, just a few minutes ago, my flexible brake line showed up. I thought it was going to hold me up till next week, so I stuck that on there, and now I'm making brake lines. And I figured I was going to go over my favorite flaring tool. For 30 years probably, I used my Snap-on, you know, the small one with the little collet you got to put in. And I plumbed, I don't know how many race cars and street cars, and I didn't think it could get any better than that tool. I was really good with it. And my crazy brother-in-law and I used to, like a 3/8 brake line from a mechanical fuel pump on a small block Chevy or big block up to the carburetor, the Quadrajet. I mean, it has a lot of bends behind the water pump and everything. We used to freehand those and make those and see who could make it look the most factory. So you spend enough time bending steel line, you get to enjoy it. It's an art form. It's fun. And then I got the style crimper I'm going to show you today. It's the one with the bar that you pull. It has a rotating workstation. That puts the whole thing into another perspective, especially as far as time goes. But when I'm going to show you how I use it, I see people using them online. I've yet to see somebody use it correctly. They skip the first step, step 0. So we'll get to that in a second, but as far as measuring your brake lines, it's really easy to have it too short. I like to lay it out and I'll mark it actually the other side of where I want it to end. You'll be surprised how much line you're going to eat up putting a few bends in it. So in this case, this one's all made, loosely installed, and I've started on this one. I flared the opposite end, and I'm over to here and I marked it to the opposite side of this, and I think it's going to be okay. So let me take it off and then we'll go ahead and put the flare on it. And probably forget the fitting and have to build it 3 times, but hey, that's all part of it. So let me set up and we'll go from there. So you need a tubing cutter. The small, there's different brands. I know IMP used to be a brand, but just gently work yourself around and cut it off. Be right back. You have to deburr it. This is a deburring tool. I got it at a plumbing store. I actually think I got it at Home Depot or Lowe's. But it's conical on either end to do the outside and the inside. You work it around the outside. You work it around the inside. If you don't do this step, it's not going to come out very well. It's probably going to leak. If you don't have this, you can use a flat file, but you got to get the circle in the middle round again, because when you cut it off, you have extra pieces in there. So you want to make sure it's flawless. And you could rub on it for half an afternoon before you actually hurt it with this thing. You just want to make sure it's ready to go. Okay, you can just see my hands, but if I've already done this end and flared it and put the nut on, if you don't remember to put the nut on this end, you can wait and do both ends at once if the line's pretty short, but make sure the fitting is on and headed the right direction. So this is my 45 degree on this end, 3/16 line, part of the tool. What I see the mistake on almost everybody that uses these online, this is the rotary turret, operation 0. What that does, you just shove the line through. You want everything too long. You want the line sticking out of the blocks, you want the blocks sticking out of the holster. Just loosely tighten it down. Operation 0 sets the right depth. It shoves everything in. Now you tighten it. You see people on there trying to guess how far it should stick out. Operation 0. Then you go to operation 1. In this case, I've already sprayed some lube on it, so we're good. All the way in tight. Operation 2. Boom, I go ahead and put it back to 0 because I'm going to do another one. Loosen this up, open it up, wiggle it to snap it off. Perfect flare. Last step is you have to blow it out. I blow it with carb cleaner and air. There's still metal shrapnel from cutting it. All kinds of junk you don't want in your brake system. And we're all installed, and that turned out pretty well, I think. All right, that line fit. A little bit of tweaking to make it look nice, equidistant from everything. Tighten it up with a flare nut wrench. No excuse to use a regular wrench unless you're out in the middle of the desert and all you have is an adjustable wrench. Get the right tool. My choice for brake line on hot rods and race cars is still the coated steel, as opposed to the copper nickel brake line, the stuff that looks golden color. That's really good for corrosion, but I don't think it is as strong as steel. And in something like this, hot rods and race cars, corrosion shouldn't be a problem. I don't envision I'm going to run Bonneville salt flats anytime soon, but I'm not opposed to it. But if I did, I guess I would have wished I made different choices for my brake lines. But the copper nickel bends easier, is easier to work with compared to this stuff. But I've used this forever and I don't mind fighting it a little bit. Long term, I think I'd rather have this. It doesn't turn green, and I believe it's stronger, even though they're both suitable for brake lines. Again, up here in the Northeast, if you're working on something that goes out in the wintertime, you definitely want the copper nickel line, for sure. I painted the brake drums yesterday. There's a lip that goes around the backing plate, so you actually have to paint the inside first and then flip them over. You could leave that bare, but that would bother me. There's enough other stuff you gotta leave bare. I like to paint as much as I can. And now I'll put the brake drums on. I'm gonna paint the whole thing overall. I like typically painting it first and then reassembling the brake lines and all that stuff afterwards. In this case, it doesn't matter. So I'm just gonna paint it all one color and be happy with it. I typically like the contrast of new bolts and new stuff, but yeah, that's just the way it is. That's my problem, my issue, my brake lines. Parking brake cables, again, for a 70 Nova. That's what this is for, 70 Nova. I bought a bunch of them just to have, and then I found some I had. Anyway, these axles, you can choose where you put the studs in. In this case, they came from when I got them from the Speedway garage sale with about a 2-inch stud, 1/2-inch fine thread. I had a bunch of nuts already open so the stud can go through them. Most sanctioning bodies, for safety, they want to see how far the stud is into the nut. So I just buy the open end Acorn style nuts. If I have different wheels, then I'll make different choices on nuts. But either way, you gotta have sufficient stud. It has to go all the way through the nut. So that's it for today, I guess. It was an exciting day. I ended up getting an engine block, and if it wasn't raining, I would have unloaded it by now, but I'm gonna leave it outside for the night, I guess, in the Suburban. And maybe tomorrow or the next day we can talk about what I dragged home now. So pretty exciting stuff. Have a nice evening. Enjoy your weekend. Take care. Stay dry if you're in the Northeast.